Gas prices have hit yet another all-time high in the province.
It's eventually going to hit over $2 a litre. It's going to become unaffordable to drive vehicles, unfortunately.
Why are gas prices in Canada so ridiculously high? With Canadians sitting on the third largest reserves of oil in the entire world, many ask themselves this very question each time they go to fill up their tanks. Are individual gas stations, who often have identical pricing, colluding? Would more pipelines help ease the burden, or how about more refineries? And how much blame should we place on our own government for the seemingly endless amount of taxation?
This idea of wanting to make this transition is giddily being pursued by people who have no understanding of the economy or the economic impacts this is going to have on ordinary people.
My name is Aaron Gunn, and this is Politics Explained. Without question, the world runs on gasoline. In 2019, more than 1.5 trillion liters were consumed around the globe, 44 billion of which were here in Canada. But where does gasoline come from, and why is it so expensive? Well, to understand the price of gas, you first need to understand its most essential ingredient: oil. The world's most important natural resource. From propane and asphalt, diesel and jet fuel, to petrochemicals, plastics, beauty products, and textiles, so much of what we use on a daily basis can trace its origins back to this ubiquitous fossil fuel. And since 1893, none have been more important than gasoline. Created from oil through a process called refining, gasoline is its own product entirely, with its own individual supply and demand. Meaning, while oil as the primary input influences the price of gas, it does not dictate it entirely. A point explained to me by former Member of Parliament and President of Canadians for Affordable Energy, Dan McTeague.
It's critical to understand that you need oil to make gasoline, but gasoline has a very different market, and there are times when gasoline can be more expensive, move in a completely different direction. We saw this in the first week of June, where gasoline prices were actually dropping as a result of dropping demand, and yet oil prices were moving up. So sometimes they're in sync, other times they are not.
So in a country that can refine nearly 2 million barrels of oil a day, why do we still have such high gas prices? Is it simply that we are not refining enough gasoline?
We produce enough gasoline to meet our needs in Canada. In fact, we export some. Go to the East Coast and the Maritimes. They sell most of their fuel to the United States. If, however, find yourself in British Columbia or Vancouver, you have two refineries, very small, maybe producing no more than 25% of that province's needs, then you are definitely a price taker. You're also a product taker.
British Columbia has only 2 small oil refineries in the entire province, which is not enough to supply itself with an adequate supply of gasoline. This is one of the reasons why BC has the highest gas prices in the country. So why doesn't British Columbia just build more refineries? Does Canada have a shortage of refineries here in BC? And if so, why not just build a new one?
Building more refineries on the coast of BC is not an economic proposition that anyone is going to invest in. It's not realistic to expect that there will be a new refinery built anytime ever in the Lower Mainland, because who would build one when the government is saying it's going to phase out gasoline-powered cars in not very many years from now? What bank would lend to someone if you said, I'm going to build a new refinery in Vancouver where they don't like refineries in the first place and they want to phase it out in a few years? Well, they cost billions and billions of dollars. They have to be large to be competitive in today's economy. Getting the refined products that are refined today, where we do have the big refineries, that's in northern Alberta, in Edmonton, is the thing that will happen. But it will only happen if we have the ability to move from point A to point B.
One possible solution to help reduce gas prices in places like BC is to find low-cost ways to move gasoline from areas with high refining capacity to areas without. But as most pipelines are designed to move only crude oil, would projects like the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion really make any difference.
The Trans Mountain Pipeline is not quite unique, but it's an unusual pipeline. There's not many like it that carries a whole mix. And through any given day, a 24-hour schedule, you'll see that it's got a succession of different products go through it. They usually stack it up from, heaviest to lightest, and there's a progression there.
The Trans Mountain Pipeline is a batched pipeline where various refined and non-refined products can move through the pipe interchangeably on any given day. For example, in the morning, an oil producer in Edmonton could use the pipeline to send crude oil for export to overseas markets, and by the afternoon, a gasoline retailer in BC could use that exact same pipe to bring in gasoline to meet spiking consumer demand. This makes the pipeline unique and incredibly effective.
The pipeline that we have now, that we call the Trans Mountain Pipeline, goes back to the 1950s, and that's a batch pipeline that lets it be mixed up whatever the market needs. The new pipeline is twice as big, and it will only carry crude oil.
The Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion is a brand new pipeline currently being constructed parallel to the existing pipe. This new pipeline will exclusively move crude oil.
What's going to happen is the crude oil that now goes through the Trans Mountain old pipeline is mostly going to shift over to the new pipeline, and that, at least in theory, it will provide more space for refined products.
Could new pipelines, specifically the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, help bring more supply into the lower mainland of refined product and lower gas prices?
Sure, because the existing pipeline would be could be repurposed, reallocated. It is a batched pipeline, so it can send more gasoline, it can send more oil, it can send light oil, it can send diesel, it can send aviation fuel.
One of the things that the gas stations do is they have that refined product come from Edmonton by another means, by rail or by truck, which is 10 or 15 times more expensive than by pipeline, because they're either shipping it by a less cost-effective method, or they're buying it from California or the Chicago or other places like that that are also quite expensive to bring it out from. So we're paying a premium for that because we haven't completed Trans Mountain.
And the worst part of this is the less oil that we sell, the less oil and gas that we sell, it has an effect on the value of the Canadian dollar versus the US benchmark. Why is that important? When you have 123 pennies to buy a US dollar, it means in the case of gasoline, you're losing about 9 cents purchasing power.
Yeah, so just to follow up on that point you're making, so you're saying that the, shutting down pipelines like Trans Mountain, or trying to protest them, and the activists, there can be a direct effect by decreasing the fuel that's reaching Canadians, preventing refineries from being built or pipelines. But there's an indirect effect of basically depressing the Canadian dollar and lowering the purchasing power of all Canadians.
Absolutely.
Which is basically another.
That's exactly what it is. It's the purchasing power.
It's clear now that increasing pipeline capacity can reduce the price of gasoline, including by strengthening the Canadian dollar. But what happens if gas stations all decide to fix their prices artificially high? Is there collusion between gas stations, and if so, how many cents a litre are they adding to the price of gas? I met with a former gas station owner just outside Vancouver to find out the profit his business made on each litre of gasoline.
Just how tight are the profit margins as a gasoline retailer?
They're tight, very tight. In fact, we were probably making about, we were lucky to make 6 or 7 cents a litre.
I'm a gas station owner. I get my wholesale price given to me the night before. I know what I have to sell my gas for. So let's say Toronto gasoline prices are $1.32.9. Of that, I know that my retail margin is 7.5 cents a litre. And out of that 7.5 cents a litre, I have to run my gas station, sometimes in the best real estate with high taxes, high municipal taxes. I have to pay my staff. I have to pay my electricity, which isn't cheap. And then I have to honor credit cards. That's 2 to 3 cents a litre. So on 7.5, I'm making 0.
And according to a report done by the BC Utilities Commission, which did find a significant unexplained difference of about 13 cents per litre on the price of gas in BC, there was no indication that retail gas stations were colluding to manipulate market prices. The fact is, these retailers have to set prices as low as they possibly can, almost always matching their competition to the cent. Otherwise, they would lose virtually all their business to their neighboring competitors. So, besides a lack of refineries and limited pipeline capacity, is there anything else that keeps gas prices in Canada artificially high? Well, yes, and it's a big one. But worst of all, it's entirely self-inflicted. Gas taxes in Canada are massive, and there's not just one. To get a sense of the magnitude of these levies on Canadians, I met with the BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Chris Sims.
So let's cut right to the chase. Just how much are everyday Canadians paying in gas taxes each time they go to fill up their tanks?
On average, they're paying more than $30 every time they fill up their minivans and more than $50 every time they fill up their pickup trucks, just in taxes.
Just in taxes?
Just taxes. So if you went into downtown Vancouver right now, you're going to be spending around 68 cents per liter just in the taxes.
68 cents a liter just in taxes, and that's the highest across the country?
That's the highest across the country. In fact, any way you slice it, that's really the highest in all of North America. If you take a look over across the border in Washington State, it's around 68 cents a gallon. Here, it's 68 cents a liter.
What exactly are these taxes? How much are they? And where is all this money going?
Great question. So we can start with the federal excise tax, which is basically your standard tax at the federal level. That's around 10 cents. Then you'll have something like your provincial excise tax. Again, that's around 10 cents per liter. Then you'll start getting into things like the carbon tax here in British Columbia for gasoline. For the first one is around 10 cents per liter. Okay. Then if you're in Metro Vancouver, you've got something called the TransLink tax. That's 18.5 cents per liter. Now you're getting into some big doozies when it comes to taxes. Then you add on the GST after all of those taxes. So there's a tax on tax.
Together, these gas prices in Canada account for almost the entire price disparity with our neighbors in the United States, ranging from a high of 54 cents a liter in Vancouver and Montreal to a low of 38 cents a liter in Alberta. But these taxes and other factors still do not explain one thing: the especially outrageous prices in British Columbia, specifically the missing and mysterious 13 cents a liter discrepancy found by the BC Utilities Commission.
Premier John Horgan of British Columbia wondered aloud why our gas prices were so high. Oh my goodness, look at these terrible gas prices. And so he actually had the tenacity or temerity to call a study, an inquiry, to find out why we had high gas prices. This is the same premier who is blocking pipelines and jacking up taxes on gas. But what was interesting is that inquiry couldn't look at the actions of government. And lo and behold, that commission came back with this mysterious 14 or 13 cent markup on gasoline, but they couldn't explain it. It's because of the second carbon tax. That's exactly why.
The second carbon tax, also called the Low Carbon Fuel Standard, is what's called a hidden tax, currently exclusive to British Columbia.
It is called the Low Carbon Fuel Standard or Clean Fuel Standard. It came into effect a few years ago here in British Columbia. It's extremely complicated. To put it in layman's terms, what they do is they take the end product of gasoline, for example, or diesel, and they have to manipulate it chemically over and over again to get it to the right formula that the government wants. Then they can send it to our gas stations. On average, it adds about 14 cents a liter of gasoline and 15.5 cents per liter of diesel.
If you don't want to talk about low carbon fuel standard, I can't talk to you because you're being deceptive. That's not what you want to do. The taxation now represents more than a third of the cost of fuel, and the tax issue will become even greater. By 2030, fully, probably about 60 to 65%, so 2/3 of the cost of fuel will be taxes.
At first glance, this claim that by 2030 taxes will make up 2/3 of the price of gas seems hard to believe. But actions taken by the Trudeau government will do just that. Trudeau ran in the 2019 election on the promise that he wouldn't increase the carbon tax beyond 2022. But after winning re-election, Trudeau announced that his government will increase the tax year by year until it hits $170 a ton in 2030. That's an increase of almost 500%. Worse yet, Trudeau was planning on imposing BC's second carbon tax, the low carbon fuel standard, on every province in the country.
The Trudeau government, Justin Trudeau, has announced that he wants to increase the tax by almost 500%. Looking at BC's experience with the carbon tax, as someone who, as a jurisdiction had the first carbon tax in North America, what should he take away from our experience before he goes ahead and implements this?
He shouldn't. He should use British Columbia as an example of a failure. The carbon tax is an expensive failure. Our emissions are going up. All it's doing is taking money out of people's pockets. It's punishing them for driving to work, and it's punishing them for heating their homes, and it's punishing them for buying groceries. Unfortunately though, when a politician tells you that this tax is for your own good and it's going to save Mother Earth, it's hard for average, hardworking, busy people to argue with that because they love the environment. They don't want to see the world polluted. They want to leave it better off for their kids. And so they'll pay this sin tax and not realize all that's happening is they're getting screwed out of their money.
The Trudeau government lied, obviously. I'm a Liberal of 18 years as a member of Parliament. I sat in the House of Commons with Justin, the Prime Minister. You know, when you come out and campaign, as you did in 2019, say the carbon tax will not go above $50 a ton, and then switch your mind last December and say, yeah, we're going to make it 170, thus making gasoline, diesel, aviation fuel, the cost of living and the cost of moving our economy, you know, 6 to 7 times higher, then, you know, you have to call them on it.
And unlike other levies on gasoline, these two carbon taxes are in place for one reason: to purposely make gasoline unaffordable for the average family. This is done in the hopes that Canadians will stop driving combustion engine cars and therefore reduce their carbon emissions.
None of it's working. Emissions are going up and not down. Why? Because the demand for something as essential as oil and gas is inelastic. People cannot simply decide to say, oh well, I don't need to eat this month, or I don't need to drive down the highway to go to work, or I don't need to heat my home. Those aren't things that they can switch up or skimp on. They have to use oil and gas to live their daily lives. They're just going to have to pay it, which is exactly what they're doing, which is why we are about $2 billion poorer as taxpayers every year, even though our emissions keep going up. So it's not helping the environment, it's not revenue neutral, and it's just costing us money.
So why are gas prices in Canada so high? Well, what's clear is that our government in Ottawa and here in BC are doing everything they can to make them that way. They don't want us driving our gas-powered cars, and they're willing to rob us at the pump to pad their bottom line. So whether it's a lack of refineries, limited pipeline capacity, or onerous amounts of taxation, it seems like gas prices won't change for the better until we change our own government.
Do you think, could you envision a future in the next couple years where we reach $2 gas here in Canada?
Oh, easy, and it's going to happen here. Yeah, for sure. It's going to happen in Vancouver. It's going to become unaffordable to drive vehicles, unfortunately.
This idea of wanting to make this transition is giddily being pursued by people who have no understanding of the economy or the economic impacts this is going to have on ordinary people. Fortunately, I think these high prices have one positive effect. They're waking people up.
My name is Aaron Gunn, and this has been Politics Explained.